Hey, what's going on, everyone? Thanks for tuning in to the Davidson podcast. Yeah, I'm grateful for Amy for connecting us on Salescast. She's such a super connector. She's connected me to some folks that I've referred into Coach Hub and beyond. And yeah, so just appreciate you, Amy, and all the amazing content that you're putting out there. Being so yeah, we have AJ Alonzo, who is currently leading efforts. He's a director of marketing, leading the marketing efforts at demandDrive, and you made your way up, starting off as an SDR and then becoming an SDR manager. You've been with the company for 9 years, which is impressive. I don't know too many people in in our this new era that we're in that stay with the company for 9 years. And I know you also have your own podcast called the Unsubscribed Podcast. Do demand um, drive as well. And yeah, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to sit down and chat. Yeah, it's funny. I've talked to a few people. We have a handful of people that have been at Demand Drive for about as long or a little bit longer than me, but it's like definitely a bit of a dying breed, like you said. It's not normal to see someone stay at a company for so long. So I have
Yeah.
had conversations with people where they're like, "Is everything okay?" Like nine years is a really long time. Like, are you sure everything's okay?
So that's funny. Yeah, usually it's the other way around, right? It's like most people they start to get that itch, especially on LinkedIn where you're just seeing so many people move jobs. Like
Mhm.
LinkedIn does not help in terms of questioning like, huh, maybe there's something else out there for me.
Yeah, like every day you get a notification from someone in your network seeing that they started a new job. And it's like, I feel like I saw this notification 9 months ago and you just were at this job. Like, what's happening here?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I admire the tenacity, the resilience, the grit. Going back to Angela Duckworth's book and her TED Talk, clearly you have grit, right, to be able to tough it out and grow and have faith in the company. That shows, honestly, that's so different. And I would say, especially in the world of SDRs, right? Like SDRs, man, I think they leave after a year typically.
Yeah, I think it's last I checked, it was like 14 to 18 months or something for like the average tenure of a rep. And obviously, like outliers, right? Some reps last 6 months, some reps are there for years and years. So I think to your point about grit, though, like the role, it's not even like it's a requirement at this point, right? Like it used to be when you were looking for an SDR, those were the qualities you look for, right? They need to be tenacious, they need to be persistent, thick skinned. Like that was what separated a good SDR and a great SDR, knowing that they could sit in the role day in and day out and kind of take a beating realistically and still make sure that they showed up the next day, they had a smile on their face. But at this point, I feel like it's a necessity to even just have that in the role. And then there are so many other qualities within that you look for within an SDR that separate them from sort of the standard. And now the standard is someone who is just resilient. But like the role
Hmm.
attracts people like that, right? It's a self-fulfilling prophecy that you would have someone who, like, maybe not like me, 9 years is a really long time, but someone who has that grit and persistence to stay with it for an extended period of time. It sort of attracts that type of personality. It's interesting.
Yeah, and it's it's one of those roles where I always tell a lot of SDRs that I currently coach now, like, dude, like these years are gonna be masterful in terms of applying it, applicable in every aspect of life, right? Like really make the most out of it, and instead of rushing it, instead of like dreading it, more like really appreciating the process and just
Mm.
making peace with like, hey, like these are going to be some instrumental times in building that foundation, right? I think too often we're always thinking about the next, and
Oh yeah.
I always say like, hey, if you really like make the most out of your SDR times, like you're going to be super successful because a lot of account executives don't have that strong foundation. They're so used to um, getting opportunities handed to them. So I always find the best account executives are the ones that truly crushed it as an SDR.
Yeah, it's funny you brought that up. There was we had an event a while ago where I was talking with someone who described SDRs not in his words, but what he's heard other people call them as ditch diggers. And when you think about it like that, like why would someone want to stay in a role that is classified as like a ditch digger? It seems like very bottom of the totem pole, like you have to kind of grit it out. But like to your point, it's a huge learning experience. And while it might be incredibly difficult for sure, if you can really look past that and think about your future and think, okay, what are the skills that I'm building as an SDR now that I can leverage later on as an account executive, as a sales leader? You have to have that like future mindset to really sit in the role for as long as you have to build up those required skills. Because to your point, there are a lot of AEs out there who don't do their own prospecting. They
Yeah,
rely really heavily on marketing, on
right.
SDRs to fill up their pipeline. And if that dries up, like they're kind of out of luck, right? So
Yeah.
there's a skill that you need to have as a closing rep, even if that's not your job per se, to build your own opportunities. It should be, because you have to know how to feed yourself. Otherwise, if all of the other wells dry up, then you are sitting there without pipeline, you're not hitting quota for a few months, and all of a sudden, a PIP comes across your desk.
Yeah, totally. It's interesting, right? Because I've been exposed to a lot of different account executives, and the ones that I see really smash it like 200% a number, 175%, 180, like the ones that are just absolutely crushing it, like they also crushed it in their SDR roles. And
Mm-hmm.
maybe you can argue, maybe it's, you're not sure if it's a chicken or the egg. Maybe they're just like ambitious people, but I definitely see, you know, because I had a lot of years as an SDR, like that definitely helped me in terms of prospecting. A lot of my counterparts, like they don't even know how to prospect. Like they'll
Mm.
be asking me like how to do very like simple things, and I'm like, huh, it's an interesting time that we're living in now.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like second nature to you. But for them, they're like, whoa, you can like account map and find different people that aren't just the person who filled out a form. Like, yeah, that's normal. How do you not know how to do this?
Yeah, and I'm curious. I mean, you've had a lot of episodes in season one so far. Like, what would you say are some of the takeaways? Because I saw you've interviewed some pretty high profile, some pretty reputable folks that are
Mm.
at the forefront of a lot of this thought leadership.
Yeah. Um, One thing, it's funny. So when we first started the unsubscribed podcast, it was kind of as like not like a pet project, but like something for us to do to help solidify more of our brand presence of the space that we're sitting in. So um, for us, it was really about solidifying like, hey, we know what we're talking about. We're going to push episodes out there to try and get some content in front of people that maybe don't know a lot about us, or do, but like haven't seen enough from us to warrant them to actually visit the website or fill out a form or whatever. So it was a lot of that. And we started by interviewing mostly people internally at demandDrive, because we felt like we weren't sophisticated or known enough to go after people who were thought leaders in the sales or marketing space. So
Hmm.
we would do like 4 or 5 episodes with managers internally at demandDrive, and then toss in an episode with somebody outside of the organization. And it got to a point where I was like, no, like we should just talk to anybody, because like our goal is to help SDRs, SDR managers like level up, really understand how to get to that next step in their career, how to see better results. Like anybody can teach somebody that, whether they're at demandDrive or not. So it took a bit of like, well, I'll just put my SDR hat back on and prospect people and see if they
Hmm.
want to be on the podcast. And I found that more than likely people were going to say yes. I've had very few people say no, I do not want to do a podcast. It
Hmm.
just seems like a medium where it's fun, right? Like you're just having a conversation with someone, you get to learn something throughout,
Yeah.
and you get to teach your audience something, which is great. So I learned that like you should just ask people to help. Like people are more often than not willing to help you and
Hmm.
grow both your audience and their audience and get their voice and their brand and out there with yours, that like you should just ask people to hop on the show. It was something that I should have known going into it, but it was this like eye-opening moment where at like, episode 20 or whatever, I was like, no, we can shift the tone of this show and start getting people outside of demandDrive on as well. And
Hmm.
it's really cool to be able to talk to, like you said, leaders in various different sort of facets of sales and marketing that have amazing points of view that like I do not. And for me, being able to talk with those people and learn and grow from those conversations is so impactful for how I then take that back to demandDrive and try different things and experiment and see what they've done and emulate it. Things that you just normally don't get to do if you don't talk with people have that don't have the same experience that you do.
Yeah, I love what you said about like you learned a lot of these skills being an SDR, right? Like just reaching out, not being afraid of rejection. And yes, like of course it sucks when people don't get back to you, right?
Right.
But it's funny in how that applies to every aspect of life, right? Like even for me, like even though this is episode 152, like sometimes it still sucks. Like when I reach out, and I'm like, oh, this person never got back to me, right? And it's like, yeah, it's never. It gets easier, but it still always sucks when people don't get back to you, right? But it definitely doesn't like hurt as much as in the beginning when I was reaching out for like the first 10 episodes, right? When I was like, all right, well, let me just play it safe, like you said, interview folks that I'm close with, and then now I'm reaching out to chief revenue officers, a lot of like C-suite, and it's definitely not as painful when they don't get back to me now.
Yeah. And I think there's also part of that SDR level mentality that you have to have with it is like when you're an SDR and you're reaching out to someone, you're doing it not just because they're like a name on a list that was given to you. It's because it should be because you think you can actually help that person, right?
Mm,
Like I think that my solution or product or whatever can bring value to you. It can help you overcome some pains or challenges, make you more money, give you less headaches, whatever it might be. So having that mentality as an SDR is very similar to as a
mm,
podcast guest, it's like, hey, I think that you can bring something to my audience. I saw something in you in the content you produce and in a podcast that you did and a webinar that you were a part of that really resonated with me that I want you to share with my audience. It's flattering, right? Like
yeah.
hearing that from someone being like, wow, like you found something that I created insightful. Like I'd
Mm.
love to be able to continue sharing this thing with other people. It's a very similar, I think, mentality to have.
Yeah, that's a good point, right? Just being really proficient at the skill of creating like a win-win, like creating
Mm-hmm.
partnership, like adding value. Yes, like in the beginning, a lot of SDRs, like younger ones, like they feel like they're not adding as much value, right? But a lot of it is just the confidence that you bring, and I think a lot of SDRs, I would say that's probably like one of the main things as to why they haven't been as successful because they think
Mm-hmm.
they're not able to add value. So they tend to hesitate or say like, "Oh, I don't want to take too much of your time," and
Yeah.
it's interesting. And then if we're really connecting the dots, like it's like no, actually at the end of the year, like I helped this person get promoted. I was able
Mm.
to make a difference, whether it's like helping employee morale engagement go up or helping them generate more revenue as the chief marketing officer for whatever XYZ, right? And I think sometimes we lose sight because we're just busy smiling dialing, but
Yeah.
if we're actually present to like the bigger picture, then it's like no, actually I'm adding a lot of value.
Yeah. But I mean, like, you're so right. It's so hard to look at the big picture when, maybe you're 3 months on the job. It's hard to hit quota. You feel like every day is the same. You're just dialing the same 80 people and trying to figure out, like, why is nobody picking up the phone? It's having the ability and forethought to look towards the future and realize the scope of like what you're actually doing. It's a lot of companies that we work with and a lot of companies that I've spoken with. That's like one of the biggest missing pieces in their entire like onboarding, training, development process is
Hmm.
where like where is the value of the SDR? Where do you sit within the overall scope of like how can you make an impact on this company, on any of the prospects you're talking with? That is lost a lot. More often than not, people come in and you're just told like sit down, make 100 dials a day, send 100 emails. Any meetings you
Hmm.
book, go to this account executive, rinse and repeat, do it again the next day. There's not like the critical thinking aspect of like, what is this all for?
Hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. I think what I'm hearing is if that's part of the SDR training process is sitting with even each of the departments so that we're present to, hey, like what does finance do? What does customer success do? What does solutions engineering do? Like I think if we are able to see like the more holistic picture and then
Mm,
see what post implementation, like what the just being I always share with SDRs like, hey, like I know this is kind of beyond your scope, your job, but if you really are present to the case studies and you understand them, you'll be so much more successful because then you're able to add tangible value versus just
mm-hmm,
picking up the phone, smiling, dialing, and then winging it, right? You're like, yes, like there's some element of like, you'll learn something from that. But I always say like, hey, do a lot of research on the case studies and understand their industry, understand their pain points, and not like just first level pain, but like a little bit deeper. And usually they'll eventually get it, but sometimes I have to tell them a few times, and then they're like, "Oh, now I see what you're saying."
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah, it's that getting to the next level. Like you understand the job, right? Like you understand what you're here to do. Okay, the next level is like, okay, understand why you're here to do it, what value can you bring? And then it keeps getting deeper and deeper to the point where like those case studies are back of the hand type information where they can just rally off story after story and really like
Yeah.
adapt their message to the person that they're speaking with, have those more um, non-scripted based conversations and really tailor a lot of what they're saying to that person that they're speaking with right at that moment.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I see the evolution of sales. Like marketing has even more of a role in that nowadays,
Mm-hmm.
where they say was it 90% of the sale is made even before they even speak to the sales rep, and
Yeah.
it's fascinating, right? Like 100% people are looking up your use cases, your you know your testimonials, like the quotes, like that. I feel like nowadays, man, marketing has even more of an impact than it ever did, and it's always been impactful. But I think in this world, like consumers are smart; they're gonna do a ton of research on you before they even talk to you.
Yeah. It's funny. Consumers are smart. They're almost too smart. And it's like this adaptation that a lot of people have made to, yeah, injecting themselves deeper in the funnel than ever before because they've looked at your stuff, because they understand at a very broad level what you're doing. It means that SDRs need to bridge the gap between what people like already know about your product and what they have to know to incentivize them into some sort of like meeting or to learn more. We've called it being the delta. So like the difference between what someone can and can't find about you online is so crucial for reps because if for example, I inbound to your organization or even you reach out to me cold, there's a high likelihood if I inbound for sure that I've done research and that I'm there to confirm some suspicions, right? Like
Yeah.
I know what you do. I know what I need to get done. I'm trying to match these things up.
Hmm.
Even if you reach out to me cold outbound, I might have already been looking at your solution. Intent data is a great way for people to find out like what I've been looking at online. It's a good impetus for them to reach out to me. I've done the research already. Both of those instances, if you start the conversation at zero, like stage zero, and you start as an SDR trying to educate me on like, oh, this is what we do. Here's a bunch of our product features. These are the companies we work with. I'm probably like, dude, I already know, right? Like I've done the research on your company. I kind of understand all of this already. I want to have that second level conversation. I want to dig deeper and really confirm, like, can you help me? And that turns a lot of people off. If they have that initial conversation and they're like, this guy doesn't know what I want, or this girl
Hmm.
isn't understanding where I'm coming from, then I'm going to go to your competitor. I'm going to find somebody else who I can have that conversation with. So you're right. It is so crucial that like with the amount of information available to you today, that buyers have evolved significantly in their process, sellers also have to evolve
Hmm.
and make sure that they're meeting them at the level they want to. And it goes back
Yeah.
to what I was saying at the beginning, where like if you're hiring somebody for the SDR job and you're just looking at something like grit or persistence or thick skinned as like a quality of theirs, they're not meeting that level of qualification that SDRs should be having to have those more critical conversations
Hmm.
to inject themselves at that level of the funnel.
Hmm.
It's like buyers have evolved, sellers are evolving, but
Hmm.
have the way that we hire the people who do the selling evolved? More often than not, that's not the case. So it's like holistically, everyone needs to level up to make sure that we're meeting buyers where they should be.
Yeah, that's a good point, right? Like the evolution of a SDR is very much like half of it is marketing, right? It's like copywriting. Like, are you good at copywriting? Are you, writing emails like in short, concise? Like, man, like that's a skill that is so valuable now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Versus like back then where you just have to be agile and be fluid when on during cold calls, right? But it's there's so much more marketing skills now that SDRs should be good at, or they will have to learn to be good at during their role.
Yeah, you mentioned it at the very beginning of this, and I'll swing it back to there. But that's like why we started SD Revolution. The idea that like there are a lot of things, skills, um, techniques that SDRs should know and should be taught and upskill themselves on to be successful in the role that is just not common, or like a lot of organizations aren't giving to their reps. Things like copywriting, things like understanding how to break your message up by persona. Like there are some really basic things that you can learn during a lot of training and onboarding processes, but those are very skin deep in most cases. And a lot of reps who are more successful are going that extra layer, like we've talked about, and having more engaging, deeper conversations that require a set of skills that typically aren't taught. And so we built the community on this idea that there is a gap that needs to get bridged. And if you go outside of your organization to any number of online sales communities, there are going to be tons and tons and tons of resources for typically closing reps. They get a significantly heavier portion of the resources allocated to them so that
Yeah.
they can better upskill. And it's like understandable, right? They're the breadwinners of a lot of organizations. They're the ones closing the deals, but SDRs are just as valuable, in our opinion, in some
Yeah.
cases more valuable, and they need their own dedicated place to make sure that they have the opportunity to learn and grow and develop the required skills to be successful at their job. So SDRev was kind of born out of that idea that like there isn't really a dedicated sales dev community yet. Let's start building one and compile a bunch of resources around things like email copywriting, around things like how to use critical thinking during the cold call process, like stuff like that to help you level up your game and get you to whatever the next step in your career might be.
I love that. Yeah, you're right. Looking back to when I was an SDR, you're right. There wasn't a lot of SDR specific content out there, right? It was
There were a
very
lot of
much.
like LinkedIn groups, which were like fine, I guess is the way to put it. They were limited, right, in terms of what you could do with it. You could connect with people and you could like post on the group page, but that was kind of it. There wasn't like a super well built out or robust community for things like podcasts and webinars and courses and events and things of that nature that yeah we felt like there was a void to be filled.
Yeah, and to your original point, it's interesting, right? Because the SDR role is so important in organizations, and I think where most people drop the ball is because AEs are obviously compensated so much higher. The companies that get it, like they will do whatever it takes to maintain like the SDRs, and will pay them out and actually get compensated on close
Mm.
won deals, right? So some companies are adapting to that because they see like, wow, this person was able to add 2 million to pipeline or whatever it is, right? And I think a missing is that not a lot of companies like get it. Yes, the SDR position is becoming more highly paid, right? Like it's becoming, companies are starting to see like, oh, this is really important, and yet there's still not the incentivization at the macro level where SDRs, because some people, I'm not gonna lie, I was a kick-ass SDR, right? If they kept paying me for it, what I was worth, like adding millions and millions to pipeline every quarter, like that's adding a lot of value to the organization, right? But it's just like, oh, okay, well, I'm just gonna go get paid a lot more, and then
Yeah.
but then it's like, but what made me a really good SDR, like I have to learn a completely new skill to be really good AE. So it's kind of
Mm-hmm.
like it's interesting how that works. But yeah.
Yeah, the whole system itself is really interesting. It's like when you think about it, you as a company you want your SDRs to succeed because overall you reduce churn. Like you said, you have reps that you can retain for longer that costs you less in the long run. They're adding millions to pipeline revenue. But then at the same time, a lot of those companies try to push those SDRs out of that role
Yeah.
into an account executive role by dangling, a 300K OTE in front of them. It's like, yeah, of
Right.
course I want to like 6x my salary. Why would anyone say no to that, right?
Right.
But if you don't, and we talked about it a little bit before, if you're not in that role for like that 14 to 18 months and you haven't built up a lot of those skills, and then you jump into an AE position and you try to also learn how to close deals while trying to build up prospecting skills, it can get really, really difficult. So it's
Yeah.
like you need to have the foundation, that SDR foundation, to, in a lot of cases, be a successful AE. But then companies are trying to speed that development process up and get you into that AE role. So
Yeah.
you're like getting conflicting messages from both sides.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? I mean, I do see like how much SDRs are getting paid now, and it's a lot more than what I used to get
Yeah,
paid
I
as an
I
SDR. So
started at like Bupkis when I in 2013. It was not great to be an SDR.
right, right, you're getting paid like pennies, right? And yes, like accounting for inflation, but even so, like they're getting paid like a lot of money. Like
Yeah.
even at Coach Up, like our SDRs are getting paid like pretty good money, you know. So it's good. Um, but yeah, I also think that um, yeah, the world has changed a lot, right? I think in this noise and everyone's virtual, like it really is harder to stand out.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Vidyard I know is one way to stand out. Like, what are some of the tips that you've noticed that have the new generation of successful SDRs are doing that's different than maybe even 5 years ago?
For sure, video I think is like one of the number one answers in most people's minds when they think about that. Like how has prospecting evolved over the past 5 years? We tend to do for any of like the way that we tier our accounts, if it's like a tier one or tier two account, and you want to make sure that you're doing the right work on it, a personalized video is often the first step in any of our cadences, just because
Yeah.
it's a great way, like you said, to grab someone's attention, whether it's through Vidyard or Loom or BombBomb or whatever service you use.
Mm-hmm.
It's a way to put a face to a name. It's a way to show off some personality, and it's a way to like prove the whole show me you know me type movement, where
Right.
if I'm recording a video for you, Davidson, and I just go ahead and I regurgitate some stuff that you could find on my website, it's like sweet, you took the extra step to like record a video, but you didn't really provide anything outside of what you could have done in an email. Video allows me to say a whole lot more about what I know about you and how I can help you and connect some things that I can't do in an email in a succinct way. So I think video, probably above and beyond any other channel, is like what I've seen reps do to grab attention these days that works really well. The other thing is just making sure that your emails are hyper personalized. And 5 years ago, that wasn't necessarily the case. Personalization was what we now, I think, call customization, right? Being able to slide in
Mm.
somebody's title,
Uh,
where they went to school, some like really basic facts about you. But like there's a tie-in to making sure that the message isn't just personalized to one individual, but also relevant to them. That I think
mm.
is at least I've seen recently taking LinkedIn by storm in terms of like people talking about it. The idea that you can say, "Hey, at person XYZ, prospect XYZ, I saw that you had a dog. That's great. I also have a dog. We should talk," is not a great message. It's personal, but it like doesn't add any value. It
Right.
has to go beyond that and be like, "Hey, I saw that you had a dog. I bet that and this is a totally fictional company. Like, I bet you get really tired playing fetch with your dog in the backyard. That's what we do here at Chuck It. We have a stick that allows you to play fetch for hours on end, worth hearing more." Like
Right.
something like that, where you can tie in the value of your solution to the personal thing that you brought in, makes for a more holistic and continuous message. Something
Mm.
that just like is one cohesive idea with personalization and value and relevance all in one.
Mm.
That's like there's like formats around emails these days that are going around that kind of tie all those things in together, that 5 years ago, if I saw one of those as an SDR, I would have been ecstatic. I would have been like, holy cow, this is revolutionary, right?
Right. Yeah, good point. And I do think there's because of the last 2 years, because of the pandemic, like I have noticed folks are more able to bring like their whole self to work, and for LinkedIn, like
Huge.
people are just sharing a lot more openness about their lives outside of work. So I
Mm-hmm.
find that to be interesting as well, because it's like, oh, okay, like yes, like you're my client, I sell to you, and we talk about business stuff, but like, oh, actually, like it's cool to get to know you as like a person as well. So I have noticed that's something that's different that I
Mm-hmm.
didn't see prior to the pandemic.
Yeah, there's a significantly higher level of authenticity in everything we do. Because I think
Yeah.
there was like a point where it was almost like, if you can smell fake authenticity, right? Like someone trying to be authentic and like share about themselves or connect with you on a personal level, that just
Uh-huh.
screams like this is a thinly veiled version of a pitch. And I think a
Yeah.
lot of that has gone away
Yeah.
recently in the past couple of years. And we are really bringing a lot of our full authentic selves to anything we do, to prospecting emails, to podcasts, to
Yeah.
events that we're doing. Um, it made me think of another tactic recently that I think has come up, where SDRs are bringing their authentic self and really bridging sort of that like business to personal life by texting prospects,
Oh yeah.
something that I think a few years ago would have been
Oh
super
yeah.
taboo. Like you
Yeah.
don't do that. And
Right.
now I think especially like post demo or post initial conversation, it's so common for someone to be like, pull your phone out and go like, hey, we were talking about getting a trial set up for how many people, or
Right.
like a quick message like that via text can accelerate the sales process
Yeah.
exponentially, and it
Yeah.
adds so much of that personal touch to the approach versus like before it was an email that
Mm.
was like, dear Davidson, I wanted to double check how many extra people we needed to add on to this trial, best regards AJ. Like super stuffy, super corporate
Yeah.
stuff like that. Doesn't I feel like it just isn't around anymore.
Hmm. No, good point outs. Yeah, that's a fair point, right? Like back when I used to call or text clients, I would get a lot of angry, people, right? I mean, yes, like you said, sometimes, once in a while you get lucky, or if you're just like a really likable person, like you get lucky. But yeah, now it's definitely more common, um, on both sides, right? The AE and SDR front for people to be sharing cell phones, and yeah, I think you're right. Like it's funny because our generation, like people knew they were getting sold to, like even in the past, right? But like people our generation like hate be getting sold to, right? So the more authentic, the more real it is, like the more likely you'll get a response, right? And it's like, back then when you used to get those corny text messages, corny email marketing emails, you'd be like, oh god, this is so bad, right? But now it's like, more authentic. You can add humor to it. There's more creativity, a lot more customization, just much more personalized, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, the data revolution, I feel like, has also helped us just have a lot more data to work with. So when you when you reach out, there's so much you can find out about a prospect. Like, it's easier in some sense, but there's also a lot more noise nowadays.
Oh, for sure. I mean, there's instances where, we're as we coach SDRs at demandDrive and we tell them how do you personalize a message? What are the sources you go to find out bits of personal information you can include in your message? More often than not, it's like, okay, step one is go to like a LinkedIn profile because there's a good mix of like personal and professional stuff in there. And if you can't find anything there, then there's like Twitter and their company website and blah, blah, blah. And more often than not, people go to step one and they're like, great, I got it. Because people are more comfortable sharing their life, that you were talking about it, personal things on sites like LinkedIn, and really contributing to that community that you can then
Yeah.
take and learn from them and understand the whole show me, you know me. What do I know about you? Can I walk a mile in your shoes and really understand what it's like to be Davidson? How can I use that to infer my message and sort of how I approach you? Um, it's funny that like, we have this like whole sequence of things that you should be doing to find stuff out about an individual or a company, and it's like, yeah, I only need one or two sources, and I just like people spill everything that they can on social these days.
I'm curious, switching gears a little bit, but kind of related. What's something like a mentor has shared with you, or advice that has like been really impactful? Kind of piggybacking on what you just said.
Mm.
I had lunch, I believe, like in New York City with one of my mentors, who's one of these AEs that has like, made over $1 million a year, just like crushing it, right?
Wow.
Like the most strategic AE that you could find, and he just gave me advice. He's like, you know what? Like, I want you to have like more fun. Like, even when meeting, like, it's like you can come off like pretty serious, And I took that to heart. Like, he's like, yeah, people like want to work with clients that they can have a drink with and just hang out with and just like
Mm.
chill with, Like you seem too buttoned up, like just open, relax a little bit. And I was just like, oh my god, like it was just like so simple, but I was just like, yeah, you're right. Like I feel like there's this business persona that I feel like
Mm.
I have to have, and then like when you get to know me, it's like different, but that's like the second meeting or the third meeting, not the first
Right.
meeting you know
Interesting. Yeah. I would say for me, um, because I stepped into my marketing role with virtually no marketing experience, it was all sales dev experience, which again, fully translatable. Like there are a lot of things you learn as an SDR that translate really well into marketing. But when it comes to like, how do you, like, what is SEO? How do I run an event? Like all that stuff, nothing. I had very minimal experience going in. And for me, the first couple of years were very tentative. I was nervous to try anything new or to break the system or like
Mm.
rock the boat in any capacity, because I was comfortable doing the things that I knew how to do, but I didn't feel like I had the leeway or expertise or experience to try new things and sort of like break the mold. And a great piece of advice that I got was to break the mold. And like, if
Ah.
you're in this role because you need to, in creative fashion, bring people to demandDrive. Like, how are people who have never heard of us going to find out about what we can do? And
Hmm.
I, for me, it was a lot of like basic stuff, like, oh, let's do email blasts. Oh, let's put on a couple of events. Let's like find ways to do territory based campaigns for our SDRs, like really basic marketing stuff that doesn't sound exciting or fun, and it's not. And then it was like, try something different, do something that maybe 2 years ago you would consider to be totally taboo for a new person in this role to do. And for me, it was starting a podcast was like one of the first things I did when I was like, if I could do anything, what would I do? And it
Hmm.
started a podcast. And it wasn't just because I thought it was a fun pet project at the beginning, but like I knew that over time it would evolve into a content engine for us that allowed us to
Hmm.
start with like a piece of audio content that we could then repurpose into a blog or into some sort of short form video content, which then turned into multiple different graphics that we could release, which turned into an event that we would compile all of the insights into. And it was this like little engine that you could create with one conversation that took a single thing and turned it into 10 other different things. And when I first started, never would have crossed my mind to start a podcast. It wasn't really like B2B podcasts weren't like huge at that time. So for me, it wasn't like top of mind of something to try out. But when I was sort of like, the leash was let go and it was like, do whatever you want, and I thought about it, like it all just made sense to me, where it was like, oh, like obviously you can just repurpose this into a bunch of other different things. And then
Hmm.
the wheels start turning and bang, all of a sudden we're, 37 episodes deep or whatever. And we've got a ton of awesome content and insights that we're able to pull from that. So for me, it was like, yeah, just like think about what you wouldn't do 2 years ago and then do it now and then see what happens. Because honestly, if your goal around demand gen is to try different ways of bringing people into the company, and you're not allowed to try ways that aren't corporate or accepted, then you're just sticking in the same lane the whole time. You have to break lane and try something new every once in a while.
Hmm. I love that. Yeah, like it really the fail fast model, right? It's
Yeah,
it's
fail
like
fast, fail often.
that's a good point. I do see there's a lot of folks who think about things but are hesitant to try different things, right? That are just it's interesting, and the ones that are more innovative that they don't they don't view failure as like this thing that happens, but more it's just like they relate to it as a lesson. Like, hey, okay, that didn't work out, and I learned
Mm,
XYZ.
yeah.
Those are the folks I find that like are successful, right? Because they're willing to push the envelope a little bit, be a thought leader, be try something different, and it's, especially because of all the noise that we have right now, like it pays off to be someone that's doing something different.
Yeah. And don't get me wrong, I have plenty of ideas that I would never touch in a million years. I was like, I have a document that I keep for myself called the master queue of bad ideas, where normally we have like a master queue of like projects that we're working on that we end up kind of filtering into some type of like dot voting or decision making system that like go to the rest of the team. We decide what to do and we move on from there. And then every once in a while, I put an idea in there and I go back to it a day later and I'm like, dude, what am I thinking? This would never work. This is stupid. So I have just like a growing list of crazy ideas that I don't think would work. But every once in a while, I look back at it and I'm like, actually, if we did do a sales dev family feud, that would be pretty cool. Like just
Oh.
crazy ideas that every once in a while, maybe you go back and see what you can dig back up on yourself. But I do want to give a shout out specifically to Dooley. Mark Young, their VP of marketing over there. Actually, I listened to a podcast of his recently where he talked about this process of like how his team comes up with creative ideas. And that was one of the big things that they talked about and that he touched on was the idea that you have to be innovative, you have to be creative, you have
Hmm.
to do something that people don't expect because there is too much noise. And if you
Hmm.
just keep doing the same old, like you're going to fall into the sea of generic messaging. The oh, this guy has a podcast and they do events and that's
Hmm.
cool. you're the same as everybody else. So I think there is a lot of room for innovation, and it's at this point like almost a necessity if you want to stick out.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of reminds me of like, I mean, at one point, it's crazy to consider like having sending like your daughter or son, your young kid into like an Uber, like a stranger's car, right? So they can drive them to school,
Yeah.
or or stay at some random person's house, right? That you never met in a different country. Like that used to be like, are you kidding me? Like that sounds like a disaster. And look
Yeah.
at these
Now they're
multi-billion
billion
dollar.
dollar companies.
Yeah, it's crazy, right? It's like wow, like to think that that used to be like crazy. Like what a concept, you know? So cool, man. Well, thanks for coming on the podcast. Yeah, a lot of takeaways from the evolution of being an SDR. I'll definitely send this to folks who are interested in becoming an SDR, or folks who I'm fortunate enough that I've been able to help over 40, 50 SDRs get promoted to AE.
That's
So,
awesome.
if anyone wants to reach out to me, wants to chat through things, I'm here as a resource. And I'll link to your podcast, your website, and your LinkedIn as well. But
Awesome.
thanks, man.
Yeah,
Appreciate
thanks for
it.
having me. It was a ton of fun.
Cheers.